Hisory Of Avaition Poscast with Derrick, Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gormn.
Was the beaver, the DHC-2. There were chipmunks and fox moths and tiger moths too. Mosquitoes, flamingos, and dragons that flew from otters and buffaloes and caribou. But the best one was the beaver, the DHC-2.
All right, I want to welcome everybody to the History of Aviation podcast for another great episode about another great plane. And as always, I'm joined by Mr. Dave Gormn and David Rowe. You guys have had a lot going on, starting with you, David Rowe. What's been going on?
Been a little busy, had some family business, had to take care of this week. So I've been out of town, took the opportunity to go check out a couple of airports in Greenville, South Carolina on my way. Kind of rainy, so I didn't get to see much, but have been out and about, and it's been slow locally, not a lot flying. So it's been quiet for me. Otherwise, everything's okay. Work's busy and ready to do some airplane talk.
Dave Gormn.
Well, we've been busy at school with standardized testing going on this week and last. At my school, we wrapped it up today. I'll give a shout out to our listener, Cameron, who goes to my school as well. And I know he's happy to finish up testing. Well, Cameron, so are the teachers, I can assure you. I made it out to the airport actually tonight, just briefly, just driving by just to see what might be out there. And there was a nice little T6, the new turbo T6 trainer out there that was painted up in an old, like an olive, old school paint job. Pretty cool. I took a few pictures of it. So other than that, trying to keep an eye on things flying overhead whenever I can. But we got rain today, a little bit more tomorrow. We'll see what's out there over the weekend.
Another gem of an airplane we've got to talk about, guys. And we're going up north for this one, aren't we, Dave Gormn?
We are. This is a prototypically Canadian aircraft. Is that the right word? It is a stereotypically. It is a fantastic Canadian aircraft, very closely associated with the rugged fur traders and the idea that you can get wherever you need to get there in a de Havilland Beaver. And my God, they built it to do those things, and it is much loved and celebrated. Yeah, like they've minted it, put it on coins and things like that in Canada. So great plane.
Absolutely. It is. It's called the Immortal Beaver, and it literally lives up to that name. Reliable. It's got great performance, and it's super dependable. That's what it was built to do, and it's still doing it to this day. It is a highly desirable aircraft. It was conceived basically as a flying pickup truck. I read a couple of things that said that they went out and asked the bush pilots, "What do you need?" And they said, "We need a half-ton pickup truck to fly around the Canadian North. We need something that's quick, takes off in short distances because we don't have big areas to work with, and can carry a lot of weight." And the de Havilland, Canada people went back and designed up the Beaver, and it absolutely fits those needs completely.
So they were coming out of World War II and had all that design experience and everything. And then this was certainly a departure, but got them into the civilian market pretty good, didn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right, because everything they were building up to that point was for the military. They had to find something in the civilian market, and they knew this need was out there. And they had a guy by the name of Punchy Dickens, I believe his name. He was a legendary bush pilot up there, and he was sort of the salesperson for it. And he just asked his friends, "Hey, tell me what you need." And so this plane was built to a need. It wasn't just a requisition of somebody's idea. There were definite needs and wants that were put into this aircraft.
And it's funny because I mentioned that it was, civilian market, but of course it was adopted and pretty heavily bought by the U.S. and some other countries around the world. So used in military service for quite a long time. Search and rescue, treks to Antarctica,
Civil Air Patrol.
So absolutely, Civil Air Patrol. So pretty fantastic. There's one hanging in the Air Force Museum in Dayton. Pretty cool. I love the quote, and shoot, you probably saw it yourself, David, looking some things up on the Beaver, but they were talking about the design of this thing, and the wing, having a big wing, and being able to get this plane in and out of places. And the engineers were saying, well, we're going to lose some performance if we build the plane the way you guys are talking about it. And the Canadians said, well, you just need to be faster than a dog sled. Right. If you can get me there faster than a dog sled, then this will be a winner. So certainly that's pretty funny as far as the advice, and they took it and ran with it, because it is definitely faster than a dog sled, capable of hauling people and equipment, personnel in and out. They put skis on it. They put amphibious floats on it. All kinds of things, and of course, wheels for conventional landing and everything. But this plane is a workhorse, and as we said, a Canadian icon.
And you mentioned the wing there. That's a 47 feet, 12-inch wingspan.
Goodness. And
well, interestingly, I just heard that is the same wing. The wingspan of the Beaver is the same distance as the rotor blades on a Huey. So if you know how big a Huey is, then the Beaver is that size.
Man. So I actually,
it's big.
I have a cousin in Canada who is a air show fanatic. Ken Mist is his name, and our grandfathers were brothers. And I've met Ken several times at air shows in Michigan and up at Oshkosh. And so I asked him about his feelings about this aircraft, being that he is a Canadian, lived all his life basically there. And he said that the Beaver is a link between the fur traders that they learned about in school and our modern world. The late 40s when it was designed, in the early 50s, a lot of Canada was extremely remote, and much of it still is. And that's why the Beaver still has a job. He said the spirit of those first explorers was passed to the bush pilots. And you can see these guys working, float planes working in the harbor in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I've seen some there flying before, which are, they're big and they're loud and they're powerful and they're really, really cool.
Yeah, no doubt. The engine on those is the reason that they're so good. The interesting story about the engines. So when they're designing this airplane, one of the requirements was it needs a lot of power. And so they were going to build it. De Havilland, Canada, was going to build it with a Gypsy engine, which is a British design, but it wasn't powerful enough. And it just so happened that the Pratt and Whitney of Canada had a meeting with some of the guys, and he was like, "Well, hey, we've got these Pratt and Whitney, or was it 895 or 985? I believe it is. Yeah, 985. Wasp Juniors. He says, we've got lots of them. They're surplus. It's actually a 1928 design. So it was actually an old engine, but they had lots of them sitting around, and they said, these will be much more powerful than that Gypsy. Why don't you strap those on front? And that was the winning combination right there, was putting that Pratt and Whitney on the front. And suddenly this plane was way more powerful than they had imagined.
And with a name like Wasp Junior, how can you go wrong?
Right. About that. Yeah. Well, so not only was it powerful, it was strong, it was sturdy. It was a lot of steel construction. Is that correct?
Yes, all metal. So yeah,
aluminum frames, panels, doors. Talk about those doors a little bit too. It's kind of interesting how this was a spec that operators were saying, hey, this is what we think we should have. And it again, really increased the usefulness of the Beaver.
Yes, exactly right. If you look at the doors, they're not square. They've got a taper to them, and you open them up, and you can put a 50-gallon drum in vertically or horizontally through the door. So it's big enough. Anything that'll fit through that door. I think the useful payload is about 2,100 pounds. So I mean, you put a whole lot of whatever in there, it'll carry it. So those doors are on both sides so that when you float up to a dock, you've got doors on either side. You don't have to, work around to the other side. An interesting thing I read about that, the way those doors are tapered at the top, when the flaps droop on those wings, they do not bind with the doors. The doors are underneath the flaps. So you can drop the flaps, leave them dropped, and still open the door and get in and out normally. That was something that they asked for. Small little details like that, in other planes, you would, have to have the flaps up to open the door. Not the Beaver. They designed it to meet those guys' specifications.
So this is a plane, as we mentioned, we see it quite often in float planes. The pictures that are behind us tonight that we all picked, all show float planes. Was the float plane the standard floor model, or was it an option?
I believe it was. They came with wheels, but I think floats were integral to the design. I think they came with wheels, and then floats were, all right, we're going to also make it so that they'll take the floats. I think that was a part of it, but I think you just bought it with wheels.
Makes sense. How many did they make?
1,600. And now this is interesting. I've got three different numbers: 1,632, 1,657, 1,692. So 1,600 plus, somewhere in that range.
Well, it's like
of that, you were talking about the U.S. Army's order. 970 were ordered by the U.S. Army, and that's what made the Beaver successful, is because orders before that were in the 20s and 30s. And then when the U.S. placed that big giant order, everybody realized, oh, this is a good airplane. Let's use it.
That makes good sense. I was thinking when you were giving those numbers, I thought about Rob Ryder, the air show announcer, who sometimes would be talking about how many, I don't know, Mustangs or DC-3s or Corsairs were built. And he said that people always had different numbers. And he said, I just tell people, whatever you think it is, you're right.
Exactly, because
those numbers were probably vetted several times, and there's still disagreements about it. But by gosh, sure was a fantastic design. And you think about where it came out of, and the fact that it still is used for much of those same roles. People who go back into the into the country to go fishing or hunting, landing on a lake that's remote and really, really hard to get to on foot. What a great way that would be to come in on a fishing or camping trip and doing all those things in a Beaver. That'd be fantastic.
A fun story that I was reading about when they were trying to sell the Beaver to the U.S. Army, some of the U.S. Army brass said, can you take us on a trip fishing up into the wild somewhere? So sure, they hop in the Beaver, they take off, they land on this little small river somewhere up in the country. And while the Army guys are out fishing, the pilot is out because he's not sure he can take off of this river because it's a winding river. And he goes out and he marks where he has to turn in the river so that he can stay on water so he doesn't run aground. So the guys come back with all their fish. They load all their fish in, and the pilot takes off and veers left, veers right, veers left, and takes off. And that impressed the U.S. Army guys enough that they were like, well, heck, if you can take this thing off of this with all the fish and extra stuff we've loaded in here, this is the plane for us. So that's part of what sold it to the U.S. Army.
That's a good timing, wasn't it?
The test pilots I read were salesmen. That was kind of what they did, is they would go out and, oh, come with us, we'll show you what it can do. And, because the competition with the U.S. Army was a Cessna 195, I believe, which is no competition at all. I mean, it just, the Beaver is miles ahead of what that can do. Not that that's a bad airplane. It's just the Beaver is made to do this.
That's a beautiful airplane, but it doesn't look anywhere near as powerful and competent as the Beaver. That's for sure. So some of these. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say one of the stories I read was that in competition, they had both of them take off at the same time. And the Beaver was up 300 feet in the air before the Cessna ever left the ground.
Wow.
Because it is a STOL airplane. It's short takeoff and landing. And the Beaver just hopped up and was in the air in no time. And the Cessna was still rolling on the runway. So,
Good.
There's a visible example of what you're looking for.
So did I read correctly? They stopped making these in the 60s, late 60s?
It had a 20-year lifespan, 1947 to 1967. And interesting story of why they stopped it. So later in life, it started out with that Pratt and Whitney engine, and they eventually moved over to a turbo engine. Pratt and Whitney TPE 3300 or something along those lines.
Yeah, the Turbo Beaver 3.
Yeah, the Turbo Beaver 3, exactly. So it's got a completely different nose. The turbo engine increased the carrying weight by another 1,000 pounds. You're up to like 3,000 useful
Jeez.
load carry. And so, I mean, just, really impressive performance. And they built 60 of those airplanes with the turbo engine. Well, at that point in time, about 1967, DHC had been bought up by Hawker Siddeley, and one of the execs, one of the head guys, came in and said, all right, we're done with these. We're going to build big airplanes. So you all shut the production down and we're going to go build big airplanes. And the test pilot was saying that, that was a dumb decision because today they could restart the line and they could sell Beavers, that they're that popular today.
Will they be selling them to the grandsons and maybe great grandsons of some of the original owners who, loved it and probably really cut their teeth flying Beavers back in the 40s and 50s? So,
yeah, absolutely. And another interesting part of the story of the Beaver is, although the Havilland Canada does not make them anymore, there are Viking Air and Harbor Air, and there's somebody other. There's multiple companies that are still building. Kenmore, that's who it is. Kenmore Air are building. Viking Air owns the jigs and the rights to the Beaver, so they can literally produce new Beavers. So if you want one restored, go talk to them. They can definitely do it. Kenmore does modifications. They've got a bubble window, so in the back seat, instead of being squeezed in real tight, they put a bubble window so your shoulders kind of lean out a little bit and you've got a little extra room. They can put rudders on your floats. What else did the steps. They've got improved steps. So as you're climbing up from the floats, there are better steps. All these little modifications to make it better. So literally, if you've got a beat up one, there you can have it totally restored today.
Well, I was interesting. It was interesting to read about the prototype, which first flew in 47, I guess, right?
Correct.
And then it actually was sold and was operated in service until 1980 or so. And then I think it was withdrawn and restored and is on display. But that's pretty cool that it even the prototype was that good, And then it
absolutely.
Something
first. Go ahead.
Something interesting that I learned in doing the research for this airplane is it is actor Harrison Ford, which I didn't even know flew airplanes, has it a Havilland Beaver. Just a fun.
Yes.
He is a longtime pilot and has flown a variety of planes, has owned a few, has crashed a few.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that.
Yep.
A lot of people have. Sorry, Harrison. But the first time I was at Oshkosh, he actually flew in and was doing young eagle flights, which I thought, what a great story that would be. That Han Solo took you up for your first airplane ride. And I tried to get in the line, and they kicked me out. Apparently, if you're over 6'5", they know you're not 7 years old. So
you just wanted to go flying with Harrison Ford, right?
Is that wrong?
No, it's not.
The idea that it went to the South Pole is pretty cool as well. So the frozen tundra of the Great White North, and then all the way down into Antarctica. This plane's been everywhere.
It literally has. I read somewhere that it's been like 100 different countries have used this aircraft. So it literally is worldwide. You can find it all across, literally every continent has a Beaver on it at some point.
Well, guys, as we're talking about the Havilland Beaver here on the History of Aviation podcast, you guys want to jump into final thoughts, starting with you, David Rowe?
Hey, this is a fantastic airplane, strong, rugged. It is literally the workhorse of the North. They use it everywhere, particularly on the West Coast, Alaska. It's a plane that, was necessary and needed, and it fills the job that it was necessary for. It's literally the most produced aircraft in Canada. That 1600, nobody else has matched it. And like Dave was saying earlier, it was instrumental in opening up the frontiers to the world. So if you want to go visit now, hop on a Beaver and it'll get you there.
And get you back.
Dave Gormn?
Well, that's important too.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, this was a thrill. This was a bit of a departure from some of the aircrafts that we've been talking about to get out of the strictly military. Obviously, this had a very successful military career as well, but it's neat to read about this plane and learn about the way it was used. And having been lucky enough to see a couple in operation with air taxi service in Vancouver and watching them, taxi in and take off and come around and circle and land and everything. I mean, it's a gorgeous plane. It's just a workhorse. I think it's beautifully ugly or ugly. What am I trying to say? It's not a stunner, but it has done the job and done the job so well. So I realized this is one that would be a great thing to get a ride in, and got to make that happen
someday for sure.
Someday. Man, I don't know if I have to go to Canada to do it, but it sure would be great.
It'd be worth the trip.
You can go to that sea base in Oshkosh. I bet they've got a few there.
Oh, they will.
I guarantee it, guys. Social media, David Rowe.
Aerophile.com, AEROWEPHILE.com. Go check it out. Lots and lots of videos, pictures, website, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm everywhere. Come see me.
Dave Gormn, social media.
Well, you can find me on, on Instagram at _ it's Dave Gormn, one word, of course. Also, Gormania is my YouTube channel where I do have a lot of aviation videos and some other things as well, but easy to find.
All things History of Aviation podcast can be found in the description below. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We have a Patreon page you need to go check out where you can see all these cool videos of how we do this thing and produce it and put it together. And that way you can see all the mistakes, because we do make those occasionally. Right?
Who does? Who? Where? What?
Mm-hmm.
It's been a blast, guys. As always, another great plane. Looking forward to the next ones. So for David Rowe, Dave Gormn, I'm Derrick Beeler. Thanks for listening to the History of Aviation podcast.
Listening to the History of Aviation podcast with Derrick Beeler, David Rowe, and David Gormn.